It was the sound no one was talking about.
Hip-hop was all underground. You had to know somebody to hear hip-hop.
It didn't really have a lot of news coverage. Radio stations were hesitant to play it.
But that was about to change.
MTV opened the doors a little bit.
And then Source magazine pops up out of nowhere.
Back in the day, if you wasn't in the Source Awards, you was not hip-hop.
The teenage white kids out in the suburbs want to know what's going on.
I said, wow, you know, hip-hop is going to be bigger than rock and roll because it's unifying people of all races and backgrounds.
But that power to unify...
It's going to cause people to get killed. It doesn't belong out there.
...can also tear people apart.
I'm your big brother. I will break your big ass down.
Y'all don't love us!
That was the match that lit the stick of dynamite.
Rapper Tupac Shakur has passed away.
Some spoke of an East Coast, West Coast rap war.
I just believe that there's more to the story with Tupac and Biggie's death than meets the eye.
September 7th, 1996, Tupac Shakur, one of hip-hop's most iconic figures, is gunned down on the Las Vegas Strip.
It's a cold, cold day in the rap hip-hop music world.
Tupac's murder and the subsequent murder of his one-time friend, then rival Biggie Smalls, will mark a bloody intermission in the story of hip-hop's rise in influence in the 90s.
You had the two most powerful hip-hop artists that were, you know, basically carrying hip-hop on their backs disappear. It really created a vacuum that led to a lot of changes in the hip-hop culture and the hip-hop industry.
The music was born in the 70s at parties in New York.
You know, hip-hop was an independent art form for a long time. You know, it had a kind of downtown scene in New York. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, James B. Duke Professor of African and African American Studies at Duke University. You obviously weren't hearing it on white radio stations, and black radio stations were really hesitant at the time to play rap music also.
What's it gonna take?
Their core audience was African-American, middle-class, and working-class adults. And what they heard when they heard hip-hop was noise.
We've decided to mask or delete 3 words that are heard in a lot of rap records, and they are and
The major record stores, they wouldn't even carry rap. You couldn't get it at Warehouse or Tower Records because they refused to carry it. They're not, you know, that's novelty stuff. My name is Greg Mack, and I created 1580 K-Day, best known as the first 24/7 rap radio station.
Anybody older than 25 in those days really looked down upon rap music and thought it was, you know, trash, or didn't think it would last, didn't take any talent to make rap music.
But 2 rap fans in an unlikely place dedicate themselves to bringing hip-hop music and culture to everyone.
They started to do this magazine out of a dorm room at Harvard, right? At first, folks are like, Harvard, right? And then you see, you know, Dave Mays and John Schechter is like, who are these 2 white boys?
My name is Dave Mays, and I am the creator of The Source magazine and The Source Awards. The Source I started between my sophomore and junior years with another white Jewish kid from Philadelphia named John Schechter.
You know, you always have these white folks in the room who are invested in the culture.
I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I got exposed to black people and black music and culture at a very early age and took a real interest and liking in it. There was absolutely no other reading material or information for this music and culture that was growing and growing.
So Dave and John decide to change that.
It went from 1 sheet to 6 pages to 16 pages. Very early on, somebody mentioned to me that I should read this book about Rolling Stone magazine. And so that became my inspiration. I said, wow, you know, I'm gonna build the Rolling Stone of the hip-hop generation.
And it's a Rolling Stone cover in 1986 featuring Run DMC that marks the moment when everything changes in the music world. That year, the trio releases a version of Aerosmith's Walk This Way.
And that opens up the portal, right? You know, Run DMC sells 10 million copies.
Even the mighty MTV, bastion of rock and pop music, takes notice and responds.
I got a man here that is currently doing a national show called Yo MTV Raps, one of the original people from hip-hop, goes by the name of Fab.
The big thing that happens is when Yo MTV gets created in 1988, you know, first with a weekly show and then a daily show, that was a game changer.
Yo MTV Raps was very instrumental for helping some of those underground artists that were like really good and doing these little baby shows, they was getting airtime. Hey, I'm Bill Bellamy, and I was the VJ of MTV Jams during the 90s. What a blast.
Interviews with rappers and performances on air give America's youth of all races an up-close look at this exploding scene.
MTV opened the doors a little bit, which was bananas for the artists. All these different artists that was like right there, now they are getting airtime. That changed the game for them. So when the doors opened up, MTV was giving a bird's eye view what hip hop was to mainstream America.
I said, wow, you know, hip hop is gonna be bigger than rock and roll because it's unifying people of all races and backgrounds in a way that, you know, no other music has really ever done.
The source starts writing about artists like Eazy-E, whose rhymes describe a very different existence from the one many of its white suburban readers are living. Gangsta rap has arrived, and its brashest voice hails from the streets of South Central LA. NWA's Straight Outta Compton is the first rap LP to get a parental advisory sticker, and its controversial single, The Police, draws the nation's attention.
When NWA came out with F the Police, at first I was like, damn, everything that I've dealt with, they're talking about. Having a Hispanic wife at the time, we were constantly getting pulled over because they thought I was a pimp. So hell yeah, F the Police, you know?
But there are no music videos, there's no radio airplay, and folks are trying to figure out what is this thing now that's on the top of the charts.
The word on the street when it comes to, you know, rap music, it's all word of mouth.
The mom and pop record stores were the place where folks would go regularly to find out what was going on. And then all of a sudden there's the source sitting there. There was absolutely no other information anywhere about hip hop.
The source became this important space early on for folks to be able to find out what was going on in the culture.
NWA proves gangsta rap can cross over to white teenagers who read the source. Straight Outta Compton goes platinum.
People say you got a lot of black people buying your music. No, you don't get to be #1 and platinum and all that with just black people. You got all races, mostly the teenage white kids out in the suburbs because they want to know what's going on.
Hip hop was appealing to people of all races. Whatever you were, if you were young, you were falling in love with hip hop. It was a youth movement.
But the story of police brutality being reported by NWA and the police is about to hit every news outlet in the world.
So when Rodney King happens, it was just really organic to be able to connect those kinds of dots.
On March 3rd, 1991, 4 members of the Los Angeles Police Department beat an unarmed black man pulled over for a traffic violation. The beating is captured on tape.
Do you have any idea at all how many times you were hit by a club? What do you remember about that aspect of it?
Several times. And then stomped and kicked.
And now police mistreatment of black people, described by NWA's The Police, is being told by every news outlet in the world.
It was one of the first times we saw police brutality against black people on video. I'm Tanya Hart. I'm an entertainment journalist.
The billowing smoke and flames could be seen for miles, an unnerving scene for people driving by.
And it rocked the world, and it rocked LA, and a riot broke out.
And largely in part because of what happens in LA with Rodney King. You know, hip-hop matured from a kind of political force that was on the fringes in the 1980s into the best on-the-ground news reporting of what was happening politically at that point in time.
And for The Source, this was a huge issue. You know, we immediately put together an incredible special edition of the magazine that was in stark contrast to the kind of coverage that you would see in any other kind of mainstream media outlet.
These brothers and sisters who are rapping and telling you stories, these aren't stories as in fables. These are real life. This is reality.
As hip-hop's popularity grows, so does the influence of The Source. The magazine launches its own award show where the line between the violence expressed in the music and the violence playing out in real life will fade away.
I'm in the front row. This is my first Source Awards. Sticky Fingers pulls out a gun, shoots the lights out up the top, puts the gun back in, slam! Dun, 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 dun. I can't slam. Because that's real glass. That means that was a real bullet and it shot the glass out. That's too real for me.
In 1990, The Source sets up offices in New York, filling mailboxes and magazine stands across the country with its glossy pages.
I worked on weekends, I worked late nights. I was, often the first person in the office and the last person to leave. It wasn't long before folks like Chuck D from Public Enemy dubbed The Source the Bible of hip-hop in the early 1990s.
I give Mays and Schechter a lot of credit, as the white publishers of a magazine. They had to bring in black journalists, right? And they did that consistently.
We began rating albums on a scale of 1 to 5 mics, and the 5 mics being a hip-hop classic.
If you didn't get 3 mics and up, you should quit. Those mics, for whatever reason, back in the day, you needed 4 or 5, real talk. You wanted 5, but if you got 4 mics, you on to something, right?
It's not 50% of the book, so it's
Matty C was the guy who basically ran that unsigned hype column at The Source. He's the one that heard Biggie's demo tape and featured him in the magazine.
The Notorious B.I.G., an up-and-coming rapper from Brooklyn, gets the attention of the Source staff with an impressive demo showing off his easy flow.
You start to look at all of the people whose careers were basically created by The Source. Like having Puffy call me and, when he's starting Bad Boy Records and say he needed, new artists, did I have anybody for him? And, giving Biggie's demo tape to him.
Sean Puffy Combs scouts new talent for Uptown Records when he's not hosting some of New York's best hip-hop parties. But in 1993, he starts his own label with Biggie as one of his first artists.
Check it out. This my man, the Notorious B.I.G.
What's the deal? What's going on?
Puffy, he understood how to package an artist to make them sell. Hi, my name is Frankie Ross. In the 90s, I was on the radio as an announcer, but I was also a program director. Puffy took Biggie and packaged him and he molded him and turned him into this Notorious B.I.G. that we loved.
The Source helps bring Biggie to the masses, chronicling his rise from local rapper to hip-hop heavyweight. When the Notorious B.I.G. lands his first cover, he's officially deemed the king of New York.
In the early 90s, New York was literally considered to be like the mecca for hip-hop.
But not to hip-hop artists out west like NWA, looking to get their music heard.
And so you got all these West Coast rappers making music, but wasn't getting no airplay.
At first the rivalry, honestly, was really just about who had the best beats and the best sound.
I've heard different versions of how the riff got started. I do know that New York didn't play West Coast artists.
When NWA's Dr. Dre releases The Chronic, his first solo record, it tops the charts, helped by the video for the single Nothing But a G-Thang. But even The Source is accused of having an East Coast bias when it gives the album a less than perfect score.
The Chronic got 4.5 mics. So, I mean, we knew it was an amazing album, we knew it was incredible, and should have gotten 5 mics.
And when Dr. Dre's protege, Snoop Dogg, releases the record Doggy Style, along with the music video for Who Am I, What's My Name, it introduces gangsta funk, hip-hop with the West Coast twist. The Source gives it high praise, helping to legitimize this new sound.
So when they broke through and artists started coming up from the West Coast and they start saying, yeah, we here now, what? The West Coast ride too. So now it's like even money. We both selling records. We both putting out hits, right? And Death Row Records was synonymous with like the West Coast energy, where we at right now, gangster rap. And we telling it like it is.
Behind the G-Funk movement is LA's Death Row Records, a label that Dr. Dre sets up with Marion Suge Knight.
Suge Knight was definitely a big deal in the 90s. He ruled the world of hip-hop, certainly on the West Coast.
I'm gonna give the people what they want. And what they want is the real stuff that they can feel.
Suge was not a producer. He was not a writer. He was a strong arm. So he was handling business like a gangster, for real. And if you're not playing my records, we gonna make you play them. That kind of energy.
Suge's tactics seem to work. With hip-hop blaring from car windows and boomboxes from New York to LA, The Source launches a grassroots marketing campaign to bring the magazine and its music to the country at large.
The Source van was like the ice cream truck of hip-hop. We would basically send a van around the country to every city, large, medium-sized cities, go into the neighborhoods, pull up outside of record stores, schools, parks, blasting music, and it was like a mobile block party. We would pass out lots of promotional items, CDs or posters, stickers, different things like that.
And while The Source will help introduce hip-hop to Middle America, one West Coast artist will emerge as the voice of a generation.
I think of Tupac as, the most important and influential artist in the history of hip-hop. He was able to reach from the bottom of the streets all the way up to the top of the suburbs, and people followed him.
Everything I ever say, whether it's good or bad, is coming from my heart.
Yeah.
And if it's wrong, then, God ain't finished with me yet. Let him check me.
He was very smart. From the time he was 10 years old, his mom made him read all of the New York Times from cover to cover every single day.
There was just something compelling about his personality, right? That thing that you can't teach, that kind of it factor, Tupac had it.
Tupac, wordplay, passion, purpose, militant, a little bit of crazy, but I liked it. It all worked. His sauce was right.
Yeah, I like to think I'm a rebel. I'm revolutionary.
Despite hailing from different coasts, Biggie hooks up with LA-based Tupac, who becomes both a friend and a mentor.
I remember when we did the Bratz video, Give It To You. He was on set. Him and Big at this time was friends. I never seen nobody smoke this many blunts in 25 minutes of my life with him and Big together. I'm sitting there probably high as and I don't smoke, but whatever.
As his career soars, Biggie turns to Tupac for advice in navigating the business.
He was a leader, somebody that people respected and listened to. I had a vision, which I think was similar to Tupac's, of how the bigger hip-hop could become. You can make it big and successful, but still keep it authentic and become a force to revolutionize and change the world.
And one of the most powerful players in the music industry, mega producer Quincy Jones, seems to want to help Mays realize his vision.
We get called out to a meeting at Quincy Jones' home in Beverly Hills. We're, whisked from the airport in limousines up into this mansion in the hills. And he says, thank you guys for coming, and, really excited, but I want to let you know what I've decided.
And then Mays lives a line from a Tupac song. Perhaps I was blind to the facts, stabbed in the back. In 1993, as Bill Clinton's inauguration is celebrated with a pop music-filled concert produced by Quincy Jones, America's youth is tuned into a very different sound. Hip-hop is growing, fast, and the 60-year-old Jones wants in on the action.
Quincy is an amazing legend, but at that time, what I gathered from listening to him and other people working for him was he really didn't understand hip-hop and the true kind of DNA of hip-hop.
Quincy reaches out to Dave Mays and his partners to invest in the Source magazine, but when they all meet, it turns out he was not looking for a partner.
And he says, I want to let you know that what I've decided to do is start my own magazine, but I'm prepared to buy you guys out for $600,000 and give you guys all, jobs working for me. And I think some of my partners were actually considering the offer. I was really angry and upset, but, politely turned down the offer.
With the deep pockets of Time Warner backing him, Quincy launches a competitor to The Source, Vibe magazine. The first issue features rapper Snoop Doggy Dogg on the cover.
There were a lot of people that predicted at the time this was going to be the end of The Source. How is this, little independent magazine going to be able to survive?
Vibe was like one of the first commercial magazines, with advertising and just look really slick and really cool artwork. And of course, Source was a little grittier and more street and more hard, more edgy.
Hip hop had become big enough that you could have both a Source and Vibe in the room and not feel as though one or the other, right, had to be the dominant portrait of what's happening in hip hop.
While The Source and Vibe battle it out on newsstands, East Coast and West Coast hip-hop artists also go to war. The one-time friendship between Biggie and Tupac Shakur is an early casualty when they turn against each other. On November 30th, 1994, Tupac is shot while being robbed in the lobby of New York's Quad Recording Studios. He believes it's a setup by East Coast rivals and points to Biggie and Bad Boy Records' Sean Puffy Combs, who were in the building at the time of his shooting, as somehow being involved.
How are you this morning?
Biggie and Puffy deny any involvement, but Vibe magazine adds fuel to the growing controversy. They send journalist Kevin Powell to interview Tupac, now in prison on sexual assault charges, about the supposed ambush. Powell would later tell Vibe that Tupac had no love for his former friend.
I remember saying to Tupac, why don't you all just come together? And, Pac said something that made me so mad, man. I'll never forget, he said, yellow M&Ms and green M&Ms don't come together.
A few months later, Biggie releases a single titled Who Shot Ya?, imagining himself in the role of a killer. Though the track was recorded months before the Quad studio shooting and doesn't reference Tupac, none of that seems to matter. Tupac takes it as a direct attack.
It was very serious. These guys were very serious. Well, here's the thing. When you are talking about the streets, if you're living that hip-hop life, you're around people living that world, there's gonna be some things.
With bi-coastal tensions simmering, The Source hopes to lower the temperature by bringing the community together in a celebration of the music. The first televised Source Awards is held at Madison Square Garden's Paramount Theater.
95 is the kind of most famous Source Awards. Of course, everybody remembers those tense moments where Suge Knight got on stage in front of an audience of 5,000 people in New York City and basically took a shot at Bad Boy and at Puffy.
Suge mocks Puffy for inserting himself into the songs and videos of Bad Boy's artists.
Any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the records, dancing. Come to Death Row.
It got like personal right there. Diddy was synonymous with New York, like partying, having a good time, putting my artists on, being in the videos, having fun. West Coast was like, nah, we don't do all that. We real out here, right?
Targeting Diddy in that moment, I would say arguably has nothing to do with hip hop, right? It just has everything to do with these two personalities clashing over who was gonna have a dominant cultural footprint.
Dr. Dre!
Tensions escalate when Snoop Dogg calls out the East Coast audience for not respecting the West.
The East Coast ain't got no love for Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Death Row. Y'all don't love us. Y'all don't love us.
Lines got drawn and sides kind of were taken, and a rivalry developed between two camps, two labels, the Bad Boy camp and the Death Row camp, and then the rivalry between Suge and Puffy. It caused a lot of tension and a lot of uproar. But there was no violence that night. There wasn't even, a punch thrown.
That was the match that lit the stick of dynamite to me.
What we saw was these wars, literal wars, shootouts between the East Coast and the West Coast.
As rap music surges to the top of the charts, politicians become its most outspoken critics.
This is, frankly, offensive to me, and I think to any parent, it is nothing but filth.
It's negative. It's in the wrong direction. It's going to cause people to get killed. It doesn't belong out there.
It's a type of music that can bump somebody up to the point where they have total hatred.
And so you think about this in terms of a political context, right? This is the era of Bill Clinton's infamous crime bill.
Let us roll up our sleeves to roll back this awful tide of violence and reduce crime in our country.
Under the Clinton administration, the 1994 Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act results in longer and harsher prison sentences.
And the crime bill was a response to perception to rising crime rates and this fear of black youth that were out of control.
I know when you're home and when you're not.
Suddenly you're seeing all these commercials for home security systems.
24 hours a day.
At the same time that white Americans are looking at these images, they're watching television shows like Cops, which double down on black criminality. So black men are seen as both prey and threat.
Before blogs and social media, print magazines dictate the story. But while the source preaches the positive messages in rap, their competitor, Quincy Jones's Vibe magazine, wallows in the East versus West clashes.
The media fed into it a little bit. You know what I mean? They leaned into it, and so it fueled the flames. So people were, curating this narrative of, is there a division? Who's better? Is there hip hop any less or more hip hop than New York hip hop? So they created a movie in a movie. And unfortunately, some of the artists got hurt by it. People lost their lives over it.
The story's been told many times with, about Vibe and the covers and the stories they printed that people have felt, contributed to sensationalizing and fueling that beef in a way.
Like its February '96 cover, Live from Death Row.
The way corporations, whether radio stations or magazines, invested in the East Coast, West Coast battle, contributed to that moment, as did a celebrity culture.
These kinds of problems are still something that's very much in the sphere of the lives that these rappers are living.
They were making these guys believe that they were like serious gangsters. They weren't really serious gangsters, not really.
Sensing things spinning out of control, Quincy Jones holds the Vibe Summit in New York. In attendance are Suge Knight and Dr. Dre, Puffy and Biggie. In contrast to his magazine, Jones preaches taking hip-hop in a more positive direction, but the summit proves to be too little, too late. Tupac releases Hit 'Em Up, a diss track aimed at Puffy's Bad Boy crew. In the song, he claims to have slept with Biggie's estranged wife, singer Faith Evans. In another interview with Vibe, Tupac continues to lash out at Biggie when he talks about schooling his one-time protege.
I'm just mad at my little brother when he don't respect me. Now, when you don't respect me, I'm gonna spank your ass. I don't give a how rich you got on the block. I'm your big brother. I will break your big ass down.
I believe in that last period of his life, he made some very aggressive and violent music. And again, that's a lot of what people unfortunately remember him for. But if you listen to a lot of his other music and you listen to the powerful messages and ideas that he conveyed for many years through his music and his lyrics, he was a revolutionary.
The East Coast-West Coast tensions boil over at the '96 Soul Train Awards, forcing host Don Cornelius to get involved.
My assistant said Tupac and Biggie are in the parking lot and they're circling around each other brandishing guns. And I went and got Don Cornelius and said, Don, you better come out here and put this out because I don't know what these brothers are gonna do.
The Source did a cover during the middle of this with Suge Knight. It ain't no East Coast, West Coast thing. I was very cognizant that a street kind of beef was coming into the industry, you know, with gang members and other people involved. So we went out of our way to get Suge to talk and to say that and to put that on the front cover of the magazine.
I saw Tupac probably a month or two before he was killed. And I said, hey man, what's up, blah, 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 because we knew each other. But he just had a look. Everything that he had dealt with in life, he just had that look. It wasn't the same glowing eyes that I had seen.
On the night of September 7th, 1996, after attending a boxing match at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Tupac Shakur is critically wounded in a drive-by shooting. 6 days later, he dies in the hospital.
It hurt, of course it hurt. Anytime one of my kids, because that's the way I look at him, die, for whatever reason, it hurts.
I would have loved to see Tupac's evolution. I mean, he only 25, 26 years old. I mean, what would he have been at 30? He'd be 40-something now. So, you know, I always got like love in there. You know, it's tough.
It was an awful feeling when I heard that he had passed. You know, of course, immediately we had to change the plans for the magazine and put together, you know, a whole tribute package about him. You know, you wanted to make sure that you did an amazing job for him in, you know, commemorating who he was and what his contributions were.
In the months following Tupac's death, theories abound on who pulled the trigger. All eyes land on Bad Boy's East Coast crew, but Tupac's murderer remains at large.
I think it's really sad, too, that there's no one out there, or the claim is no one out there saw anything. I think that somebody saw something, and they should most definitely come forth and say something.
For Biggie, it's a sign that it's time to put the rap beefs behind him.
It's time to just be forgiven. Right.
But the realization comes too late.
In case you haven't heard, it's been all over the media, all over the news. Rapper Tupac Shakur has passed away.
Today, hundreds line the streets outside a Nation of Islam school to pay their respects to the slain rapper.
I'm just here to show my respect for Tupac. My brother was a good brother.
His words really give us strength to keep on moving and look forward to another day.
It's still a lot of negativity out here, and the violence is going to take more than just Tupac's death to stop.
I still don't think people's going to learn from it. I still think a lot of stuff is going to go on, a lot of killing, a lot of violence still. They're not going to learn nothing.
While the hip-hop world is still reeling from the death of Tupac Shakur, another is soon to follow.
The night Biggie was shot, Again, it was another Soul Train party. I was excited because we were going to be at the same table with Sean Combs, with P. Diddy. But for some reason, my husband said that night, no, I don't think we should go. Really strange that night, and he was insistent that we do not go.
6 months after Tupac's death, 24-year-old Notorious B.I.G. is murdered in a drive-by, gunned down after a Soul Train party in Los Angeles.
The rapper's car was riddled with bullets, leaving him so badly wounded that he was pronounced dead at the nearby Cedars-Sinai Hospital.
I don't know if people love Big everywhere, but New York took a L on that. Like, Big meant so much to people. You felt the pain of a funeral of, like, Mandela. To see people on the ground crying and stuff, you like, damn, it was big to people.
I would want him to be remembered as one of the most talented and gifted artists of his time.
To the hip-hop community, it was a big loss because he was like one of the best artists that, you know, ever rapped or was ever in hip-hop.
He was a good man. He was a generous man.
It's a sad day. It's a sad day.
Another devastating loss, and the blame game continues.
There are questions whether Biggie's murder may have been retaliation for the drive-by slaying of his arch-rival, California rapper Tupac Shakur.
Some spoke of an East Coast, West Coast rap war.
So this is another round fired in this war of the rappers?
Well, we hope that we're not getting into that situation. This is a very tragic event, and it has similarities to another shooting. But there were a lot of people that were in the area, and we're hopeful that someone would come forward and give us information so that we can close this case.
It might not have to do with Death Row and Bad Boy, but, you know, it got to do with East Coast, West Coast, for sure, yeah.
Hopefully, this isn't anything that has to do with East Coast, West Coast.
People looked at Biggie being shot. It was retaliation for Tupac. So, everybody was guessing. I don't know.
And then again, we look back at that. They never found the person who killed him either. What's that all about?
We here with him. You understand what I'm saying? We gonna carry on his legacy regardless. You understand what I'm saying? After the cameras and everything is gone, we carrying it on because we live this life after death. We make that life after death happen.
As fans mourn, they turn away from the headlines and find another way to celebrate their heroes.
You could feel the impact that it had on people here in LA. Murals started going up with Pac and, you know, the brothers on the corners selling T-shirts.
And immediately, right, you start to see these ghetto art depictions of Biggie and Tupac. And the way that we romanticize about them in death has a lot to do with the role that they played in the lives of young people at that time.
This artist says his crew is trying to convey a serious message.
The message behind it is one coast, one culture. Stop the violence.
Two of hip-hop's biggest stars dead, the music eclipsed by a sensational story. In the aftermath of the two rappers' deaths, hip-hop insiders point the finger at Vibe magazine for fueling the ongoing war between Tupac and Biggie.
That East-West crap, Vibe has to take a lot of, they should have got a bullet. Wow. They should have got a bullet.
In a tribute to Biggie, the source asked the question on everyone's mind: how can hip-hop move past the violence?
I don't understand this. You know, I just don't understand it. I mean, this is a beautiful guy that got killed over nothing, really.
I don't think either the death of Tupac or Biggie was the result of street violence and street rivalries. That's, again, another myth that I believe has been painted for people to try to make people think about rap music in a very negative way.
Dave Mays has his own ideas about who was really behind the killings of hip-hop's two biggest stars.
In my opinion, there was other forces at play that became evident, you know, over time, years later.
As a founder of The Source magazine, Dave Mays was an eyewitness to the rise of hip-hop and the fall of two of its brightest lights, He has his own theories on who killed Tupac and Biggie.
You know, hip-hop was a very powerful force in mobilizing and empowering, you know, the black community and unifying a lot of other people. And, you know, I believe that, you know, very early on, it became a threat similar to the way black power movements in the 60s were viewed by the government. So I just believe there also was an element of government and law enforcement, you know, infiltration and involvement. The same thing we've all learned over the years about what happened in the 60s with COINTELPRO.
The source still tracks what's happening in the world of hip-hop, including the closing of West Coast-based Death Row Records after Suge Knight is sent to prison on assault charges. The magazine also documented the many hits released by East Coast-based Bad Boy Records, including the song and video for I'll Be Missing You, a tribute to Biggie. And while Mays left the source in 2006, the magazine continues its mission and remains the longest-running voice in hip-hop journalism.
I don't think hip-hop has ever died. I mean, I think that's the beauty of it, is that hip-hop will never die.
Rap music is getting to a point where everybody has beefs with each other, and it's just getting to a point where it's getting out of hand.
I think that hip-hop learned a valuable lesson after Big and Tupac's death. We're all doing the same thing, trying to, you know, feed our families. We're trying to make hit records. We're trying to blow up.
You never had a problem. You're just speaking about it now because enough is enough.
If the East-West thing would have kept going, it would have just got worse and worse. So I think that just said, wait, stop, reset, woosah, let's go forward.
After Biggie and Pac died, what did happen was you started seeing women get into hip-hop. You'd see the Mary J. Bliges and you'd see all the Lil' Kims, and women were finally invited to the party. And it was really time because, of course, women always have a lot to say and we're usually good at it.
The beef that we saw with Tupac and Biggie, which was a centerpiece of so much of the culture in the 1990s, would be a passing Twitter beef today.
But many of the systemic issues that 90s hip-hop gave voice to in its lyrics continue to plague American society today.
I was telling Ice Cube recently how proud I was of him, you know, writing that song. If you really go back and listen to the stuff he was writing back then, and it's like, oh, wow, this is still going on. There's nothing wrong with a party record here and there, but hopefully somebody will get off of the bling and talk about something that's going on in the world, but it makes it interesting.
Hip-hop can be that force that finally rids this country and this world of racism and systemic racism and unifies people, levels the playing field. Hip-hop still has the power to do that.
I think what the 90s did was bring the power of television and social justice in a way that was in your face and in your living room. But we can look back at that and learn many, many lessons about where and how we should move forward. I do have hope that somehow we will be able to all get along, just like Rodney King said. We will get along.
Is that Rodney? This is Jonathan Ross. Oh, piss off, Mickey Pierce, Rodney yelled. The studio audience erupted. Del wanted to crawl into a hole and die, but eventually the message got through. Rodney, help me for 50 grand. Which classical guitarist? Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Ravel, Rodney said, his voice confident. I'm 100% sure. Del, I know my classics. Del turned back to Jonathan Ross a look of triumph on his face. It's Ravel Jonathan. Final answer. Derek. That was the wrong answer. It was Segovia. The silence in the studio was louder than any applause. Del felt the Rainbow Road crumble beneath his feet. He had lost it all. Again. Chapter 6. The morning after the night before. The cab ride back to Peckham was the longest of Bill's life. He had abandoned Raquel and Damien at the studio in his rush to flee the scene of his public humiliation. He had walked through London for hours, looking at the city that had once been his playground and was now his judge. When he finally walked through the door of the flat, he found Rodney and Cassandra sitting in the dim light of the television. "How's your evening been, Rodney?" Del asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Not very good, to be honest," Rodney replied. A bloody snap. Del shouted, "Everyone knows Ravel makes shoes. It was a trick question, and you fell for it." "He's got to GCE's," Raquel yelled from the kitchen. The argument that followed was a master class in Trotter's sibling rivalry. The bone marrow was brought up. The mother's dying wish was invoked. The yellow coppery was banned. But then the phone rang. "Hello," Rodney answered. "Yes, can I ask who's calling?" He looked at Del, his eyes wide. "Del, it's the producer of Gold Rush." Del took the phone with a trembling hand. "Yes, this is Derek Trotter." "What? No." He listened for a moment, his face transforming from a mask of despair to a glowing beacon of hope. He hung up and looked at the family. "They made a mistake," Del whispered. "The producer, he said there was a technical error. It was Ravel, or something. They're giving me the 50 grand and I'm going back on the show for the 100. "Yes," Rodney cheered. But as Del looked at the phone, he heard a faint sound from the receiver, the sound of a jukebox, the sound of laughter, the sound of Mickey Pierce. "I'm gonna kill him," Del whispered. "I'm actually gonna kill him." But as he looked around the room at Raquel, at Rodney, at the nipper sleeping in the corner, he realized something. They were broke. They were bankrupt. They were back in the flat. But they were still the Trotters. "This time next year," Del said, a familiar glint returning to his eyes, "this time next year, we'll be millionaires." Rodney looked at him, a weary smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're a plonker, Del, a total plonker." "I know, Rodney," Del grinned, patting his brother on the shoulder. "But I'm your plonker. Now, let's get down the nag's head. I think I know a bloke who's got a consignment of digital watches that only work in the dark. It's a gold mine. Rotters. A literal gold mine." The sun began to rise over Peckham, casting a golden light over the tower blocks and the market stalls. The Trotters were back in business. The Peckham Paradox. A novelization of the Trotter Chronicles. Chapter 1, The Ghost of Success. The elevator in the high-rise office block smelled of expensive floor wax and the faint, lingering scent of desperation. For Derek Del Boy Trotter, it was a smell he had become intimately acquainted with, though usually from the other side of the mahogany desk. Beside him stood Rodney, looking as though he'd been poured into a suit that was 2 sizes too small for his conscience. Rodney's knees were practically knocking together, a rhythmic percussion that matched the jittery beat of his heart. "What's up with you, Rodney?" Del asked, his voice a gravelly whisper that still managed to carry the authority of a man who once owned a yacht. He adjusted his cufflink, a gold-plated relic of a time when the gold was real. "I'm a bit nervous, Del, that's all," Rodney stammered. "I mean, this bloke we're going to see, this Justin, he's a professional. He's not going to be asking me anything about my private life, is he? My personal business?" Del rolled his eyes, a gesture honed through decades of brotherly frustration. "Of course he ain't. We're not that private, Rotters. He's not going to want to know about you and Cassandra's little hiccups. He's here for the business, for the history, the raison d'etre, as the French say." "What hiccups?" Rodney's voice hit a pitch that could have shattered a champagne flute. "Me and Cassandra haven't got any problems." Del leaned in closer, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of mischief and pity. "That's not what you said to me the other night, is it? 1 or 2 minor issues in the bedroom department? I told you I'd keep it in confidence. Didn't I? I'm not going to be telling him about jiffins and things. And I certainly won't tell him what Cassandra wears when the lights are low." Rodney opened his mouth to protest, but the heavy oak doors at the end of the hall swung open. Justin, a man who looked like he'd been carved out of a very expensive piece of ivory, beckoned them in. The office was a temple to modern capitalism, all glass, chrome, and silence. It was a silence that felt heavy like the air before a storm. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Justin said, his voice as smooth as a vintage cognac. "It's been a particularly busy morning. Now, I've got all the basic details about your business career, the meteoric rise and the rather sudden descent. But what I'd like to do today is get an insight into the real you." He leaned back, clicking a gold pen. "How you started, how you became so successful, but more importantly, the legacy of the Trotter name, in your own words and in your own time." Del took a breath, the familiar mask of the international businessman sliding into place. He looked out the window, past the London skyline, toward the hazy, gray silhouette of Peckham. "Well," Del began, his voice dropping into a soulful cadence, "where shall I start, Justin? Up to a few years ago, we were just very ordinary people living very ordinary lives. Weren't we, Rodney?" Rodney nodded mutely, still thinking about the bedroom hiccups comment. And then Del continued, his eyes misting over with a genuine, if slightly polished, memory. "One day, I discovered an historic and almost priceless artifact, a watch, a simple watch that changed everything. Chapter 2, The Golden Age. Dell's mind drifted back to the days of the Trotter Empire. He remembered the sun in Barbados, the way the turquoise water felt against the hull of their boat. He remembered the feeling of £6.5 million sitting in the bank, and numbers so large it felt like a fantasy. At first, Dell told Justin, we didn't know what to do with it. We thought about donating it to the British Museum. A national treasure, you see. But then, well, we decided to flog it. And before you know it, Rodders and me were looking at enough dosh to buy half of London. He described the way they divvied up the money, ensuring Uncle Albert had a nice little drink for his retirement. They had donated to charity generously, of course, and then they had looked toward the future. We sought out a city stockbroker, Dell said, his voice hardening. A man of vision. He advised us to invest in a new venture, the Central American market. It was vibrant. He said, attracting funds from all over the world. We were making more money than the Royal Mint. But the memory shifted. The sun of Barbados was replaced by the cold, flickering fluorescent lights of a hotel room in a country whose name Dell could barely pronounce. He remembered the television screen, the scrolling red text of the stock market crash. The Central American miracle had turned into a Central American massacre overnight. The negotiations collapsed, Rodney added, his voice hollow. It was wiped out. Everything. We'd even paid for the hotel on a credit card that was withdrawn while we were still at the breakfast table. Dell's creative business mind had saved them from immediate arrest, but the fall was long and painful. By the time the news hit the UK at the speed of an internet click, their business associates had vanished like mist in the morning sun. We were cast into a financial wilderness, Dell said, and the worst part wasn't the money. It was the people we'd taken with us. He thought of Mike, the landlord of the Nag's Head. Mike, a man who had remortgaged his pub to follow the Trotter dream. Now, Mike was sitting in a cell, awaiting trial for embezzlement, a desperate attempt to recoup the losses that Dell had inadvertently caused. Never was a man more innocent, Dell whispered, though he knew the brewery didn't see it that way. Chapter 3, The Shadow of the Mariner. The return to Peckham had been a homecoming to a place that no longer recognized them as kings. Nelson Mandela House still stood, its concrete gray and forbidding. The peacocks and the riverfront estates were gone, replaced by the familiar smell of stale cabbage and damp in the hallways of the 12th floor. But the financial loss paled in comparison to the silence in the flat. Uncle Albert was gone. The funeral was a blur of gray rain and black umbrellas. Dell stood by the graveside, his heart heavy with a guilt he couldn't quite articulate. He'd left Albert behind while they were off globetrotting, off chasing the next big deal. I feel bad. You know, Dell whispered to Rodney as they stood among a small crowd of mourners, leaving him here while we were in Barbados. He wasn't alone. Del, Rodney countered gently. He had Elsie, and he had her family. The service was somber. A woman named Marion, who had cleaned for Albert, spoke of him with a fondness that surprised Del. Lovely old man, she said. Went on a bit, though. Del looked at the floral tributes. One in particular caught his eye, a large arrangement shaped like a Spitfire. His chest swelled with pride. Look at that, Rotters, the old sod. He'd have loved that. Remember his stories. The Battle of the Baltic. During the war, a man named Roland, claiming to be Albert's nephew, stood nearby. He looked annoyed. God, he did go on, didn't he? Roland muttered. Never bloody stopped with the wartime sagas. Del felt a spark of the old trotter fire. Actually, Roland, we loved those stories. Everyone involved was fighting their own individual war, weren't they? Blokes lost their lives for our liberty just so prats like you would have the freedom to knock him. He was ready to take Roland outside for a detailed chat when a young boy, Damien, tugged at his sleeve. Is that a Spitfire, Dad? The boy asked, pointing at the floral arrangement. Del nodded, his eyes tearing up, but then he looked closer. He looked at the name on the headstone. He looked at the mourners, none of whom were Trigger, Boyke, or Denzel. Rodney, Del whispered, his voice trembling. Why did that woman call him Bunny? Because his surname was Warren, Del, Rodney replied, his face turning as white as a sheet. Albert's surname was Trotter. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They were at the wrong funeral. Somewhere, in another corner of the cemetery, Uncle Albert was being laid to rest without them. Chapter 4, The Court of Broken Dreams. The legal system had no sense of irony. The Inland Revenue didn't care about the wrong funeral or the miracle that had vanished. They only cared about the $48,750 for pounds and for pence. Del sat in the courtroom, listening to the charges. The Inland Revenue versus Trotters Independent Traders. It sounded so official, so final. When the verdict came, it wasn't the prison sentence Rodney had feared, but it was a different kind of death, bankruptcy. It means they give you a year to pay off the debt, Del explained to a distraught Raquel back at the flat. Then they come in and take everything of value. The goods, the furniture. So it won't affect us. Then Rodney joked weakly, looking at the worn-out sofa. This flat is our home, Rodney, Raquel said, her voice cracking. They'll take the roof over our heads. Del looked at his family. He saw the fear in Raquel's eyes and the uncertainty in Rodney's. For the first time in his life, the "this time next year" mantra felt like a lie. Trigger said they're recruiting down at the depot. Raquel suggested softly, road sweeping. The pay isn't bad. Del scoffed. Me, a road sweeper. I'm a trader, Raquel. I've been trading since I was 12. I could sell rice to the Chinese. But the reality was unavoidable. Dell was disqualified from running a company. If he took a loan, the taxman would take it. If he worked in cash, the customs and excise would be on him. He was a man without a country, a businessman without a business. Unless Trotter's independent traders can still operate, Dell mused, a familiar glint returning to his eyes. I'm just banned from running it. We need a new managing director, someone young, enthusiastic, someone with ideas. He looked at Rodney. Rodney, who was currently trying to figure out if he could fit a broom into the back of the Capri, looked up. What? No. Dell, not me. Why not you? Rotters, legally, there's nothing to stop you. You've got the brains. You've got the GCEs. You'd be the captain of the ship. Managing director. Rodney whispered the words as if they were a spell. Rodney Trotter, MD. And so, the new era began. A sign was fashioned, a new hierarchy established. Rodney was in charge of sales, purchasing, and finance. Dell was the consultant. Chapter 5. Fantasy and Friction. The stress of their new reality took its toll on the youngest Trotter household. Rodney and Cassandra were drifting, their conversations replaced by a heavy silence that even the Peckham traffic couldn't drown out. It's memory baggage, Rodney told Dell one afternoon at the Nag's Head. I read it in a magazine, expert on marital problems. He reckons most couples' troubles stem from bygone days. We need to become different people, reborn. Dell sipped his cognac. Dressing up, is it? It's called fantasy therapy, Rodney explained, trying to sound intellectual. Iconoclastic autosuggestion. We write down our fantasy figures, and for one night, we become them. No reality, just make-believe. That evening, the Nelson Mandela House flat was transformed. Rodney had spent the afternoon at a theatrical costume shop, returning with a brown paper bag and a look of terrified determination. Cassandra was the first to emerge. She was dressed in a police uniform, the hat low over her eyes, the handcuffs dangling from her belt. She looked authoritative, sharp, and undeniably stunning. I've arrested you, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Rodney emerged next. He had chosen a gladiator outfit, complete with a plastic breastplate and a leather skirt that did nothing for his spindly legs. He looked less like Russell Crowe in Gladiator and more like a man who had lost a fight with a Roman laundry. Are you supposed to be Spartacus? Dell asked, having walked into the living room to borrow a lighter. Russell Crowe. Rodney barked. You look like Billy Elliot with worms, Dell countered. Anyway, I'm taking Raquel and Damien out. You to have the flat to yourselves. Enjoy the mating ritual. As Dell left, Rodney turned to Cassandra. The silliness of the costumes began to fade, replaced by a genuine connection. For a moment, they weren't a bankrupt couple, living in a council flat. They were just two people trying to find their way back to each other. But the night was interrupted by the phone. "Don't answer it," Cassandra whispered. "I have to," Rodney said, his gladiator sandals slapping against the linoleum. Dell's expecting a very important call. He picked up the receiver. "Trotter's Independent Traders. How may I help you?" "Good evening," a voice said. "I am wishing to speak with the managing director." "This is he," Rodney said, standing tall in his plastic armor. "My name is Rodney Trotter. I am a representative of the Sultan of Brunei," the voice continued. Rodney rolled his eyes. He knew that voice. "Oh, shove it, Mickey Pierce. Shove it right up your. I knew it was you. Give it a rest, will you?" He slammed the phone down. Mickey Pierce, he told Cassandra, pretending to be the Sultan of Brunei. What a whaley! Chapter 6, The Golden Rush. The important call Dell had been waiting for wasn't from the Sultan. It was from a television producer. A week later, Del Boy was standing under the searing heat of studio lights, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a contestant on Gold Rush, the fastest game show on TV, hosted by the inimitable Jonathan Ross. And finally, Jonathan Ross announced to the cheering audience, "We have Derek Trotter from Peckham, a businessman who loves fine wines, the theater, and 16th century Italian Renaissance art." Del beamed, waving to the camera as if he were addressing a board of directors. He had made it through the timed rounds, his fastest finger aided by a bit of luck propelling him to the center stage. "Del, come and join me," Jonathan said. "You're our first challenger on the Rainbow Road. Whatever happens, you've got a pound in your pocket. Welcome to the BBC." The game was simple, but brutal. Correct answers moved you up the rainbow toward the 100,000 pounds gold question. Mistakes froze you out. Del breezed through the early rounds. He knew Kilimanjaro was in Africa thanks to a duty-free brain cell, as he put it. He managed to navigate a tricky question about the state where JFK was born by using his shot in the dark option. But then came the 50,000 pounds question. The lights turned to deep, warning red. The audience went silent. For 50,000 pounds, Derek, Jonathan Ross said, his voice echoing in the vast studio. Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Del froze. He knew the names, but his brain felt like it had been scrubbed with a wire brush. He looked toward the camera, toward the millions of people watching at home. "I'm going to have to use my SOS. Jonathan," Del said, his voice cracking. "And who is your savior tonight?" "Derek." "My brother, Rodney. He's at home, taking care of a bit of business. He's got to GCE's, you know." The studio crew dialed the number. Back in Peckham. Rodney was sitting on the sofa, still wearing his gladiator breastplate for lack of anything better to do. The phone rang. "Hello," Rodney answered, wary of another Mickey Pierce prank. Rodney, it's Jonathan Ross. Oh, piss off, Mickey, Rodney shouted. You're getting on my tits now. Rodney, no, it really is Jonathan Ross. I'm here with your brother, Derek, and he needs your help for 50,000 pounds. Dull's voice came over the line, sounding small and desperate. Rodders, help me out. Son, which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and The Enchantment? Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Rodney hesitated. He thought of his GCE in music. He thought of the hours he'd spent listening to Mozart to ease his executive stress. Ravel, Rodney said firmly, 100%, Dell, it's Ravel. Dell turned back to Jonathan Ross, a look of triumph on his face. I'll go with that, Jonathan. It's Ravel. The studio fell into a hush. Jonathan Ross looked at his card, then back at Dell. Derek, that was the wrong answer. It was Segovia. The frozen lights bathed the stage in a cold, blue glow. Dell's face fell. 50,000 pounds had vanished into the ether. But Rodney said, Dell stammered. I'm sorry, Dell, Jonathan said, but your brother was wrong. You're frozen out of the game. Chapter 7, The Final Irony. The journey back to Peckham was a long, silent affair. Dell had disappeared into the night immediately after the show, leaving Raquel and Damien to take a cab home provided by the studio. When he finally walked through the door of the flat, Rodney was waiting, looking like a man awaiting execution. What the hell happened to you? Rodney asked. I went out, Dell said, his voice flat. I went to a club, talked to a laptop salesman. Even he said it wasn't Ravel. I'm sorry, Dell, Rodney whispered. I could have sworn. You and your two GCEs. Dell scoffed. Ravel makes shoes, Rodney. It was a trick question and you fell for it. You're a pair of dipsticks, the lot of you. He threw a 1-pound coin onto the table, his only winnings from the night. Just then, the phone rang. Raquel answered it. Her face went pale. Dell, it's the producer of Gold Rush. He wants to talk to you. Dell snatched the phone. Hello. Yes, this is Derek Trotter. What? No. He listened for a moment, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief, and then to a cold, hard, cynical smile. He said there's been a mistake. Dell told the room. He said it was Ravel. He said I can take the 50,000 pounds and come back on the show. Rodney jumped up, a cheer beginning to form in his throat. I knew it. I knew I was right. But Dell didn't cheer. He looked at the phone, then out the window at the familiar lights of the estate. He heard the faint sound of a jukebox from a distant pub. Nice try, Mickey Pierce. Dell shouted into the receiver. I can hear the jukebox in the pub. You phone here again, and I'm coming down there to kick your arse into shredded duck. He slammed the phone down. What are you doing? Rodney yelled. That was the producer. We're rich again. It was Mickey Pierce, Rodney, Dell said, his voice filled with a weary certainty. Winding us up, trying to get a rise out of the Trotters. He picked up the 1-pound coin and looked at it. Don't worry, Dell said, the old familiar spark returning to his eyes, even if it was just a flicker. I've worked it all out. I'm a trader, ain't I? This time next year, we'll be millionaires. Rodney looked at his brother, then at the phone, then at his plastic gladiator breastplate. He sighed, a long, tired sound that seemed to sum up the entire history of the Trotter family. Yeah, Rodney whispered, this time next year. Outside, the wind whistled through the concrete canyons of Peckham, carrying with it the echoes of 1,000 schemes, 1,000 dreams, and the enduring, unbreakable spirit of the two brothers who refused to let the world win. The end. The Peckham Phoenix. A novelization of the Trotter Chronicles. Chapter 1, The Yellow Ghost of Peckham. The yellow three-wheeled Reliant Regal then rattled through the streets of Peckham like a skeletal remains of a decade everyone else had tried to forget. On its side, the faded lettering still defiantly proclaimed, Trotters Independent Traders, New York, Paris, Peckham. It was a lie, of course. They had been to Paris briefly. They had never been to New York, and Peckham was currently trying its best to pretend they didn't exist. Derek Delboy Trotter sat behind the wheel, his rings catching the stray glints of a London sun that looked like it had been filtered through a greasy chip wrapper. He was humming the theme tune to his own life, a melody of seasons changing and tides turning. I'll fetch the suitcase from the van, he muttered to himself, a mantra of the perpetual salesman. Beside him sat Rodney. Rodney, the graduate with 2 GCs and a brain that was currently a chaotic blender of existential dread and marital anxiety. Rodney was looking at the dashboard as if it were a ticking bomb. What's up with you, Rodney? Dell asked, his voice a gravelly mix of concern and irritation. You look like a man who's just found out his lottery ticket was for last week's draw. I'm a bit nervous, Dell, Rodney admitted, his voice cracking slightly. This bloke we're going to see, this Justin, he's a documentary maker, right? He's not going to be asking me anything personal about my private life. Dell swung the van around a corner with the grace of a shopping trolley in a hurricane. Of course he ain't. We're not that private, are we? We're public figures, the Trotters of Nelson Mandela House. But what about, me and Cassandra, our hiccups? Dell rolled his eyes. He's not going to want to know about your little problems in the bedroom department, Rodney. Though, strictly speaking, if you're having hiccups in the bedroom, you're probably doing it wrong. I told you that in confidence, Rodney hissed, his face reddening to the color of a ripe tomato. And I'm keeping it in confidence. Dell shouted back. I'm not going to be telling him about jiffins and what Cassandra wears. I've got more class than that. Mostly. Chapter 2, The Interrogator. Justin was the kind of man who wore spectacles not because he needed them, but because they made his expensive degree look even more expensive. His office was a minimalist vacuum of white walls and overpriced Scandinavian furniture. He looked at the Trotter brothers as if they were a rare species of beetle that had accidentally crawled onto his silk tie. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Justin said, his voice dripping with the practiced sincerity of a BBC middle manager. "It's been a particularly busy morning. Now, I've got all the basic details about your business career, the watches, the bottled water, the pre-war lead soldiers. But what I'd like to do is to get an insight into the real you." Dell leaned back, crossing his legs and adjusting his tie. He felt at home. Give Del Boy an audience and a chance to rewrite history, and he was more dangerous than a shark in a tuxedo. How you started, how you became so successful, Justin continued, leaning forward. But more importantly, your lives and your raison d'etre. Dell blinked. "Oh, no. Laboratory Garni. I don't use that stuff. It's all natural, this hair." Rodney groaned into his hands. "He means reason for being. Dell." "I knew that." Dell snapped. "I was just checking if he did." "Right then, Justin. Where shall I start? Up to a few years ago, we were just very ordinary people living very ordinary lives. Weren't we, Rodney?" Rodney gave a hollow laugh. "Ordinary. Dell, our childhood involved hiding from the rent collector behind a sofa that was technically also being repossessed. Details, details." Dell waved a hand dismissively. "And then, as you know, one day I discovered an historic and almost priceless artifact. A watch. A Harrison Lesser watch. Found it in the back of a garage. It was like a sign from the gods of commerce." Chapter 3, The Golden Age. For a brief, shimmering moment in the mid-90s, the Trotters had been kings. The novel of their lives had transitioned from a gritty social drama to a glossy jet-set thriller. Anyway, Dell continued, his eyes glazing over with the memory of pure, unadulterated wealth. "At first, we didn't know what to do with it. We thought about donating it to the British Museum as a national treasure. We really did. We felt a sense of duty to the crown. We thought about it for exactly 3 seconds," Rodney corrected. "And then we decided to flog it." Dell grinned. £6.5 million. Justin, can you imagine that? 6.5 million of the Queen's finest nuggets. We divvied the dosh up. Made sure our Uncle Albert got a nice little drink, bless his old seafaring soul, and we thought of others. We donated to charity. Enormously, of course. We bought a round of drinks for the whole Mag's Head, Rodney whispered. That was our charity work. It felt like a charity, Dell insisted. Have you seen the state of Trigger? He needs all the help he can get. So, eventually, We had to start thinking about our future. We sought out a city stockbroker, a man with a tie thinner than a strand of spaghetti and a brain like a calculator. He advised us to invest in a new and vibrant venture, a Central American market. Dell stood up, pacing the small office. It was attracting massive funds from all over the world. We were making more money than the Royal Mint. We weren't just flat, Justin. We were ascendant. Chapter 4, The Fall of the Empire. The flashback in Dell's mind was vivid. He remembered the heat of the Caribbean, the smell of expensive sun cream, and the feeling of a platinum credit card in his pocket, a card that felt like it had the power to stop the rotation of the earth if he swiped it hard enough. He remembered Raquel, his significant other, looking like a movie star in a wide-brimmed hat. He remembered young Damien, the fruit of his loins, playing on the deck of a yacht. He remembered Rodney and Cassandra, looking like they finally belonged in a world where the wine didn't come from a box. And then the music changed. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the sound of a phone not ringing. It was the sight of a computer screen flickering with red numbers that shouldn't have been there. She's into superstitions. The radio had been playing in the hotel lobby. Livin' La Vida Loca. It turned out, Dell said, his voice dropping an octave, that negotiations between the Central American countries had collapsed, wiped out. The market didn't just crash. It evaporated. It was like someone had pulled the plug on the ocean. We'd even paid for the hotel on a credit card. Rodney added, the ghost of the trauma still visible in his eyes. A credit card which was withdrawn while we were still at the breakfast buffet. I was halfway through a bowl of exotic fruit, and suddenly I was an international pauper. Dell nodded solemnly, but Derek Trotter is, if nothing else, a creative businessman. I came up with a solution. We had to leave. Fast. We ran, Rodney said. We literally ran for the airport while the concierge was still looking for the bill. Chapter 5, The Financial Wilderness. The return to the UK was not met with a ticker-tape parade. The news of the Trotter collapse had traveled faster than a Peckham rumor. How long did it take for the news to hit the UK? Justin asked, scribbling notes furiously. About as long as it took for someone to push a button on the internet. Dell sighed. Suddenly, all our so-called business associates wouldn't return our calls. We were cast into a financial wilderness. It was like the desert, but with more rain and less sand. And then there was Mike. Rodney reminded him. Dell's face darkened. Mike Fisher, the landlord of the Nag's Head, a man who had seen the Trotters as his ticket out of the pub trade. Mike invested his life savings in our venture, Dell explained. He actually remortgaged the pub. He's in prison now, awaiting trial. The fraud squad claims he tried to recoup his losses by embezzling the brewery. Never was a man more innocent. He confessed to everything, Dell, Rodney pointed out. He was under duress. Dell shouted, "The pressure of the brewing industry is immense." The narrative shifted to the waiting room of the court. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and the nervous sweat of Peckham's finest. Denzel was pacing, wearing the marble floor down. Uncle Albert was sitting there, looking like a weary old owl. Trigger was. Well, Trigger was staring at a wall, possibly having a conversation with his own shadow. "Trig, if I go in there and tell the truth," Denzel had said, "Dell and Rodney are going to be spending the next 5 years sharpening Jeffrey Archer's pencils. I'm going to tell them I hear voices." Trigger had replied, with the terrifying sincerity of the truly confused. Chapter 6: The Wrong Side of the Grave. The funeral of Uncle Albert should have been a moment of dignified sorrow. Instead, it was a master class in Trotter-esque absurdity. The family stood in the biting cold of a coastal cemetery. Dell was genuinely heartbroken. Albert had been their anchor, the man who had survived the Battle of the Baltic only to be nearly killed by those cooking. "I feel bad," Dell whispered to Rodney as they stood by the grave, "leaving him here on his own while we were off globe-trotting. We should have taken him to Barbados." "He didn't have a passport, Dell," Rodney reminded him. "He thought the Germans were still looking for him." They stood amongst a group of strangers. A woman named Marion was crying. A man named Roland was complaining about Albert's wartime sagas. "God, he did go on, didn't he?" Roland sneered. "Never bloody stopped. The John Wayne of the East End." Dole's blood began to simmer. It reached boiling point. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "You've got to remember that a lot of blokes lost their lives for our liberty, just so that 50 years later, prats like you would have the freedom to knock them. You want to go outside and have a chat, Roland?" "Calm down, Dell," Rodney pleaded. It was only when the young boy, Damien, looked up at a passing plane and asked if it was a Spitfire that the reality hit them. "Wait a minute," Dell said, looking at the headstone. "Bunny. Why did you call him Bunny?" "Because his surname was Warren," Roland said. "Albert Warren. Raff." The silence that followed was heavy. "Rodney," Dell whispered, his face turning ashen, "we're at the wrong funeral." "Oh, let's go," Rodney hissed, grabbing Dole's arm. They fled the cemetery like grave robbers who had forgotten their shovels. Chapter 7: The Phoenix Arises, sort of. Back in Nelson Mandela House, the grandeur of the millionaire years felt like a dream someone else had had. The flat was cramped, the wallpaper was peeling, and the Inland Revenue was knocking on the door with the persistence of a woodpecker on a metal pole. "The court declared me bankrupt," Dell announced to the family. "But don't worry, I've worked it all out. I'm a trader. I could sell rice to the Chinese." "The firm's been liquidized, Dell," Rodney said, sitting at the kitchen table. "Disqualified," Dell corrected. I've been disqualified from running it. That doesn't mean the company is dead. We just need a new managing director. Someone young. Someone enthusiastic. Someone with the GCEs. Rodney looked up, a glimmer of hope or madness in his eyes. Me? Yes, you, Rodney. You can take over Trotter's independent traders. Legally, there's nothing to stop you. You're clean, mostly. And so, the new era began. Rodney Trotter, managing director, Dill took a back seat, or rather, he sat in the front seat and shouted directions while Rodney tried to drive. They were back in business. They were trading again. The goal, $48,750 for pounds. That was the debt. That was the mountain they had to climb. Chapter 8, The Golden Ticket. The idea for Gold Rush came to Dell like a divine revelation during a late-night session of channel hopping. It's a game show, Rodney, Dell shouted, bursting into the living room. Jonathan Ross, you can win 100,000 quid. It's the fastest game show on TV. Dell, you think King Edward introduced the potato to England? Rodney said flatly. I didn't hear the question properly. Dell insisted. I've worked it out. I'm going to apply. This time next year, we'll be millionaires. Again. This time last week, we were millionaires, Cassandra pointed out from the kitchen. But Dell was already filling out the form. He wasn't just a bankrupt salesman from Peckham anymore. In his mind, he was a Renaissance man, a lover of fine wines, the theater, and 16th century Italian art. He was Derek Trotter, and the world hadn't seen the last of him. Chapter 9, The Brunei Connection. The telephone in the Trotter household was a fickle instrument. Sometimes it brought news of a consignment of Hookie v. Sears. Other times, it was just the electric company wondering if Dell intended to pay his bill within the current century. One evening, as Rodney was trying to maintain a facade of managing director gravitas, the phone rang. Trotter's independent traders, how may I help you? Rodney said, his voice an octave deeper than usual. Good evening, a voice responded, accented and dripping with importance. I am wishing to speak with managing director. This is he, Rodney said, puffing out his chest. My name is Rodney Trotter. I am representative of the Sultan of Brunei, the voice continued. Rodney's heart did a little tap dance against his ribs. He looked at Dell, who was currently trying to clean a fake Rolex with a bit of spit and a rag. Dell, it's the Sultan of Brunei. Dell stopped rubbing the watch. Yeah, and I'm the Pope's golf partner. Give it here. But Rodney was already hooked. How may I be of assistance, sir? His Highness has seen your advertisement in the newspaper. He would like you to fly to Brunei and be his consultant. Rodney's eyes glazed over. He could see it now. Gold-plated yachts, silk robes, and a world where duty-free wasn't just a suggestion. Consultant. On what, specifically? Recently, the voice said, suppressed laughter starting to bubble through the accent, His Highness bought a crappy old three-wheeled van, and he wants to know how to start it on cold mornings. The line exploded into the unmistakable, high-pitched cackle of Mickey Pierce. Rodney slammed the phone down. I knew it was him. I was just winding him up. Del shook his head. Rodney, you're about as good at winding people up as a sundial in a coal cellar. Get back to your paperwork. Chapter 10, Fantasy Therapy. Rodney's marriage to Cassandra was, in his own words, a series of minor hiccups in the bedroom department. To address this, Rodney had turned to the modern equivalent of a witch doctor, a lifestyle magazine. It's called Fantasy Therapy. Cass, Rodney explained that night, his voice hushed. This expert in America says our troubles stem from memory baggage. We need to become different people, reborn. Cassandra looked at him over the top of her book. Different people. Do I get to be someone who lives in a house without a yellow vent parked outside? No, it's about iconoclastic autosuggestion. Rodney insisted. We write down our fantasy figure, and for one night, the other person becomes that figure. No dressing up required. It's all in the mind. All right, Cassandra sighed. I'll try anything to stop you talking about memory baggage. They wrote down their choices. Cassandra handed her slip to Rodney. He opened it and blinked. The bill. You want me to be a copper? Just a position of authority. Rodney, she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. Rodney's own fantasy involved a certain gladiator, or maybe a heroic figure from a film he'd seen recently. He didn't say it, but he had a plan. The next evening, the plan went horribly wrong. Del burst into the flat to find Cassandra dressed in a full policewoman's uniform, complete with a baton and a look of professional disapproval. Rodney, on the other hand, was standing there in a leather tunic, looking like he'd been rejected from a low-budget production of Spartacus. Oh, my God, Del shouted, nearly dropping his bag of takeaway. I thought we were being raided. Cassandra, I didn't know you'd join the force. And Rodney, what are you? A Roman centurion with a vitamin D deficiency. It's a fancy dress party. Del, Rodney yelled, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his tunic. We're going to a party. My ex-boss at the bank invited us. At 5:30, Del asked, skeptical. A bit early for a rave, isn't it? It's an early party for people who have to be up for work. Rodney grabbed Cassandra's arm. Come on, Reg Hollis. Let's go before he starts asking for our badges. Chapter 11, The Lights of Gold Rush. The BBC television studios were a labyrinth of cables, tired security guards, and the smell of industrial-grade hairspray. Del stood in the wings of the Gold Rush set, adjusting his suit. He told the producers he was a connoisseur of the arts. He'd told them his hobbies included fine wines and 16th century Italian Renaissance art. In reality, his knowledge of fine wine stopped at anything that didn't have a screw top. And the only Renaissance art he owned was a framed picture of a crying boy that he'd bought at a car boot sale in 1984. Welcome to another edition of the show that is taking the country by storm. The voice of Jonathan Ross boomed through the speakers. This is Thursday. This is live. This is Jonathan Ross, and this is Gold Rush. Del stepped onto the stage, his smile fixed, his rings gleaming under the studio lights. Beside him were his competitors, Mike Wallace, a financial advisor who looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, and Janice Scott, who seemed genuinely terrified of the cameras. And finally, Ross announced, "We have Derek Trotter from Peckham." Derek is a businessman who lives with Raquel, his significant other. His pastimes include fine wines, the theater, and 16th century Italian Renaissance art. Del gave a thumbs up. Lovely jubbly. Jonathan, just happy to be here for the culture, you know. Chapter 12, The Rainbow Road. The game began with a flurry of questions. Del's finger was poised over the buzzer like a predator waiting for a slow-moving gazelle. Whose famous diary recorded the plague and the Great Fire of London? Ross asked. Del hit the buzzer. Mrs. Dale's. The studio went silent. Ross blinked. Nice try, Del. But I'm afraid that's not right. You're frozen now. Eventually, through a series of fluke errors by his opponents, Del found himself as the first challenger on the Rainbow Road. He stood in the center of the stage, a 1-pound coin clutched in his hand, his guaranteed prize. Whatever else happens, that's yours, Ross said. Just make sure it ain't Irish, eh? Del quipped, winking at the camera. He breezed through the early rounds. He knew Kilimanjaro was in Africa mostly because he'd once tried to sell a crate of T-shirts with the mountain printed on the wrong side. He survived a challenge from Janice. The money climbed. 10,000, 25,000. And then the green question. In which state was President Kennedy born? Del hesitated. He remembered the news footage. He remembered the tragedy. Well, when he was assassinated in 1963, he was in a terrible state. He died. I need the name of the state. Del, Ross urged. Texas, Florida, or California? Del sweated. He used his shot in the dark. Florida, he shouted. No, Ross sighed. It was Texas. But you played your shot, so you're still in the game for the penalty question. Chapter 13, The Ravel Debacle. The penalty question was worth 50,000 pounds. If Del got it right, he'd move to the final gold question for 100,000. Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Del's brain stalled. Classical music. He was a man of the people. He liked the theme from Z Cars and anything by Tom Jones. He needed his SOS. He needed his brother. My brother, Rodney, Del said he's a graduate to GCE's. He knows his classics. Back in the flat, the phone rang. Rodney, still in his Spartacus tunic, answered it. Hello, Rodney. It's Jonathan Ross. Oh, piss off. Mickey, you're getting on my tits now, Rodney yelled. Rodney, it's not Mickey, it's the BBC. Your brother is on 50 grand. Realization hit Rodney like a bucket of cold water. He listened to the question. Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Ravel. Rodney shouted into the phone. I'm 100% sure, Del. It's Ravel. Del, back in the studio, looked at the camera with the confidence of a man who had just been handed the keys to the Bank of England. It's Ravel, Jonathan. My brother knows. He's got the brains in the family. Are you sure, Derek? Ross asked. You don't have to take his answer. No. Rodney's spot on. Ravel. The buzzer sounded a long, agonizing drone of failure. Derek, Ross said, his voice filled with genuine pity. That was the wrong answer. It was Segovia. Del's face fell. The 100,000 pounds vanished into the ether. What? But Rodney said, he's got to GCE's. Chapter 14, The Return of the Conqueror Not. The journey back to Peckham was long and silent. Del walked through the door of the flat to find Rodney and Cassandra waiting, still dressed as a gladiator and a policewoman. What happened? Rodney asked, his voice small. What happened? Del exploded. What happened is that you're a dipstick, Rodney. That's what happened. Everyone knows that Ravel makes shoes. It was a trick question, and you fell for it. Shoes? Rodney stammered. Ravel wrote Bolero. I don't care if he wrote the Bible. He makes shoes in the Peckham High Street. You lost us 50 grand. The argument raged until the phone rang again. It was the producer of Gold Rush. Hello. Yes, this is Derek Trotter. What? No, really. Del turned to the room, his eyes wide. There's been a mistake. The producer says it was Ravel. Segovia was just the guitarist who performed it or something. They've checked the facts. I can have the 50,000 pounds and come back on the show next week. The room erupted. Rodney cheered. Raquel cried. Even Cassandra hugged her prisoner. See, Del shouted, his voice reaching a crescendo of triumph. I knew I was right. I knew the Trotters were back. He grabbed the phone again. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Give all the money to charity. Yeah. And if you phone here once again, I'm going to come down there and kick your arse into shredded duck. He slammed the phone down. Del, Rodney screamed. What did you do that for? Because, Del said, a sly grin spreading across his face, that wasn't the producer. I could hear the jukebox at the Nag's Head. That was Mickey Pierce again. He sat down, exhausted but undefeated. Don't worry, Rodney. This time next year, we'll be millionaires. And in the heart of Peckham, for the 1000th time, they almost believed him. The E&D for now. The Peckham Redemption, a Trotter Odyssey. Chapter 1, The Gray Room of Reality. The office of Justin a Man, whose suit cost more than the Trotters' combined monthly income during their lean years, smelled of expensive furniture polish and the cold, sterile scent of bureaucracy. Outside the window, the London skyline was draped in a miserable, drizzling shroud of gray, but inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a predatory energy. Derek Delboy Trotter sat on the edge of a leather chair that felt far too soft for a man who preferred the hard, honest stools of the Nag's Head. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and tried to summon the ghost of the multimillionaire he had been only months ago. Across from him sat Rodney, looking like a man who had been caught in a storm without an umbrella and had finally given up on trying to stay dry. So Justin said, clicking a heavy silver pen, "Mr. Trotter, I have the basic details of the business career, the colorful history of Trotter's independent traders. But I'm looking for the soul of the story, your raison d'etre." Dell leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with a desperate, familiar spark. "My what? Oh, the laboratory Garni. Yes, quite. It's a French term, isn't it? Very sophisticated." Rodney groaned softly, a sound that started in his toes and ended in a weary exhale. "It means reason for being, Dell, not a garnish." "I knew that, Rodney. I was just testing the boy," Dell snapped, then turned back to Justin with a grin that didn't quite reach his ears. "Well, Justin, where do I start? We were just ordinary blokes. Working class heroes, you might say, living the dream in a high-rise in Peckham. And then we found it." Dole's mind drifted back. He could almost smell the dust of the garage where they had found the Harrison Lesser watch. He remembered the silence of the auction house, the way the gavel had sounded like a thunderclap when it hit the block at £6.2 million. For a moment, he wasn't in a bankruptcy hearing. He was on a beach in Barbados, a pina colada in one hand and the world in the other. "We were gonna donate it to the British Museum," Dell lied, his voice softening with practiced nostalgia. "A national treasure, we thought. But then Rodney here, ever the practical one, suggested we flog it. Before you know it, we were divvying up the dosh. £6.5 million. Justin, enough to make the Sultan of Brunei look like he was on the social." He glanced at Rodney, who was staring at his own shoes. The memory of the money was like a phantom limb. They could still feel it, but it wasn't there anymore. "We took care of our own, of course," Dell continued. "Uncle Albert got a nice little drink. Charity, too. We were enormously philanthropic. But then the stock market, a vibrant venture in Central America. It was a sure thing, Justin. A gold mine. It was a black hole," Rodney muttered. "Details, Rodney. It was a market attracting funds from all over the globe. We were making more money than the Royal Mint. We had the family with us, Raquel, Cassandra, the Nipper Damien. We were the kings of the castle.